One of the interesting things that I find about Benatar's view of suffering is that he doesn't really explore it as exhaustively as I might have liked. It's just taken that suffering exists and it's to be avoided. I would sort of say, what is the ultimate nature, the fundamental nature of suffering? I would say suffering is an experience that something does not want to have. In fact, it's something that a conscious entity or a sentient being has an aversion to. It's an experience. In other words, without a subject, without something experienced suffering can't exist. There has to be an experiencer of it, or it can't exist. So suffering is something that takes place in the first person. It's something that one experiences. Now, ultimately, what is it, though? We know that it's an experience. I think that that's something that one would agree upon, although I'm open to being questioned on that. But I mentioned before that there is a certain element of the faculty of choice involved there, where you have means at your disposal to reduce your suffering, but you don't avail yourself of them. Now, that's an interesting thing. Again, it's an interesting thing when you sort of see someone, as it says in the book of Proverbs, some people are so lazy they won't put food into their own mouths. Now, that is, to me, an unsatisfactory way of coming at suffering, and coming at suffering particularly in the context of what one can actually do about it. Because it tends to, if you say that the person is too lazy to put food in their own mouth, you're saying that hunger is therefore a moral failure. Laziness being apparently a moral failure. It's not something that, it's not something that you're not responsible for. It's your fault if you're a lazy person. I think that that's what it means. And I'm not even sure if that's in the book of Proverbs. I don't know. But anyway, I'm not all that well read in the Bible. But it's an interesting thing because it implies, and I think that our civilization kind of buys into this notion, that if we're trying to reconcile our apparent ability to influence our own lives and the fact that our lives don't always turn out the way we want them to, it's kind of our fault, guilt. Now, I don't agree with that point of view. I think that it's a misreading of what suffering is, in particular, what our ability to make choices is in reference to our suffering. It's not as though we're choosing to suffer. I suppose it's theoretically possible. Again, I mentioned in Amor Fati, one would not necessarily choose deliberately to suffer, but wouldn't see suffering as something inherently to be avoided. Because, again, we have the transformative power of love. I made a few videos on that a while back, just under the title Love. And I think that we sort of agree that love can sort of alter things, that the experience of feeling love can alter one's experiences of things. So we have a certain input into our own experiences. If we cultivate love within ourselves, it will, in the end, alter our experiences of other things, including our experiences of suffering. What fascinates me is the question inherent in that original point that I made in this video. What is it that would prevent someone from exercising their faculty of choice in order to reduce their own suffering? I have, for example, let's say that I'm suffering, I'm miserable about my life in a general sense. And I see, say the Salvation Army band marching down my street, beating their drums, playing their trombones and everything like that, and singing and beating on their what are those things called? Bing, bing, the things that they're known for pounding on, the Salvation Army. Cymbals, not cymbals, but tambourines. Let's say that I see that taking place, and I'm sitting inside and I'm miserable, and I see that these people are getting some fresh air, they're working on their emotions, they're working on feeling really good, they're praising God, let's be honest, and I choose not to engage myself in that kind of activity. I choose not to join the band. Now, one could say that, probably a physician or a psychologist would tell you that if you actually went out there, if you, got outside and followed them along and sang with them and beat their tambourines with them and, whatever, there's some chance at least that your overall sense of well-being will be improved. Why would I not do that? Well, I know why I wouldn't do it. First of all, I have no desire to do something like that. I have no desire to, get on the wagon and start praising God and all that kind of thing, because I don't really trust that kind of way of feeling good about yourself. I don't trust the religious approach to it. But you see, I don't have the idea that the reduction of suffering is so important. But if I do have the view that the reduction of suffering is all important, I kind of don't have that as an excuse. I don't have skepticism as an excuse not to do something irrational if that is actually going to make me feel good. It doesn't, or make me feel better than I am now feeling. We all know that, say, sitting listlessly on the couch for days on end is not very good for your overall sense of well-being. But a person who is sitting listlessly on the couch will see something happening that they see other people engaging in that does seem to be benefiting these other people, and yet they still opt not to engage in it. They engage their faculty of choice not to do this. Let's put aside this idea that somehow it's their fault now that they're sitting listlessly on the couch in a state of abject depression and misery. Let's say that it's not simply their own laziness that is placing them there, because I think that that's kind of putting a moral on their suffering, a moral value on their suffering. In other words, it's their fault. Guilt. It's your fault if you're suffering, because you're not willing to, as the book of Proverbs says, put food into your own mouth. Let's say that there's something else that would prevent somebody from actually taking concrete steps to reduce their own suffering. What might that be? I don't even necessarily have an answer to that. But again, I've posited the view that saying that I don't believe in that is not necessarily a rational response given, say, in terms of Benatar asymmetry alleged, that you actually do believe that the reduction of suffering has the ultimate value. Somebody would sort of tell themselves that they believe that the reduction of suffering is all important, but then they would somehow recoil from the thought of doing something that may actually reduce their suffering. Now, I would say that that's not so much laziness. That's far too simplistic, I think, a point of view to take. Again, it's kind of a very moralistic Christian sort of kind of view that, your sufferings are your own fault. What I would take that as, it strikes me as confusion or a lack of self-examination, because maybe you only think that the reduction of suffering is the most important thing, or maybe you only think that you think that. It's one thing to say that I believe this, and it's another thing to actually believe it. I've often thought that most of the religious people that I see, I rather suspect that most of them don't even believe what they say that they believe, and they don't even believe what they tell themselves that they believe. I don't think that most, in my experience, most of the religious people that I've spoken to in my life actually confront themselves with what they tell themselves that they believe, especially people that come from a tradition that has elaborate mythologies and cosmologies and stuff like this. Do you actually believe all that stuff that's written in the Bible and the Old Testament? And do you actually believe, all these complicated theologies and everything like that? When people tell me that they believe that, I'm inclined not to actually believe that they believe them. It's not that I don't. It's not that I don't believe that they believe it, but it's just that they don't, at bottom, actually believe it. Now that strikes me as irrational. You believe that you believe in something. You don't actually believe it. or you believe in something, or say it's the old faith conundrum, my faith isn't strong enough, and again, in the Catholic tradition, that's somehow implied, it's always implied that it's your fault that your faith isn't strong enough. Or maybe it's just that you only believe that you believe in something, as opposed to actually believing in it. Or you want to believe it as opposed to you actually do believe it. So, if somebody says that they hold that the reduction of suffering is all important, in fact, it's more important than anything else, and yet they exercise their faculty of choice to not engage in that which will reduce their suffering, is it fair to say, at least at a superficial level from the outside, that they may not believe what they believe that they believe? In fact, they may just believe that they believe that the reduction of suffering is all that matters. They may not actually believe that, and their own actions and their own conduct is powerful evidence to that effect. Are we really that self-aware that we actually know what we actually believe? What we're actually convinced by, deep down? I'm not so sure that we are, because again, we're capable of these kinds of contradictions. Of saying, I believe that the reduction of suffering, say Benatar would say that the reduction of suffering is what has ultimate value, but then he won't sort of allow for, or I presume, and again, I'm open to be contradicted here, he won't allow for certain activities that will reduce suffering. I would say then that there are caveats attached to his own view that the reduction of suffering is all important. I would say that he's saying, as a general rule, the reduction of suffering is all important. It's not an absolute.